time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, over 30 million South Koreans are set to go to the polls on Wednesday as local government and parliamentary by-elections are held for some 17 mayors and provincial governor positions, along with over 3,600 council seats of varying ranks. And 7 National Assembly seats, of course, will also be up for grabs. And well, with the local elections coming up, just less than a month than President Yoon being inaugurated into office on May 10th, it's going to be the first test of confidence in his government. With less than 24 hours to go before the polls open, we discussed the local and parliamentary by-election races to be held on June 1st with AN Jun-seong, visiting professor of Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies, and David TIZZARD, professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Very warm welcome to you both, and well, lovely to see you here, Professor An. My first question going to you. So, well, right now with the June 1st elections being held tomorrow, the biggest focus seems to be on the Seoul mayor and Gyeonggi-do province governor post. So let's begin there. Let's begin with Seoul, where the incumbent Oh Se-eun has a clear lead over Song Yong-gil from the Democratic Party of Korea. So first of all, what's the reason for Oh's popularity, and what was the reason that the DP put Song forward for mayor?
Well, good morning, right? Okay, well, in respect of the Oh Se-eun's popularity, I think there's 2 different aspects. First of all, he's very strong incumbent, right? And because he has been elected as Seoul mayor before, right, already, and he has done his job pretty well. For instance, right, he's received over 62% of the vote for the last election. And second, his real estate plan or policy got popular among the Seoul citizens, right? His policy, which is in line with his political party, PPP, right? The PPP's policy is that focused on the supplying more housing and then urban redevelopment. However, on the contrary, the Song Yong-gil is not a strong contender to the Oh Se-eun. For instance, well, he never been elected as the mayor, right? And his political party's real estate plan policy has been failed, and which caused more, problem to the current housing market in Seoul, right? So I think there's a policy issue, and then the personal experience differences, right?
Professor TIZZARD, well, it looks like the PPP's candidates, they're pretty much in the lead in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. So what does that really indicate about what people want?
It's a very good question, and good morning to you all. I think it indicates what people want, but it also shows us what people don't want. So in the last 2 elections, in the mayor election and in the recent presidential election, the Conservative Party have won both of those. And while some analysts might suggest that this is a sign of South Korea shifting to the right or a growth of conservatism in South Korea, I see it rather differently. I think South Korea is becoming more progressive, more open-minded on various issues, but it shows us that this was in some ways an anti-vote. It was expressing their disappointment with the previously ruling Democratic Party. There was a lot of hope for President Moon's administration. A lot of that hope and the wishes from the Candlelight Revolution didn't come to fruition, and so people are now desiring change. Some of the change that they want, as Professor An mentioned earlier, centers on the housing issue. The housing market in South Korea, in Seoul in particular, is very difficult. It's hard for young people, middle-aged people, or even old people to find a home. That's one of the key issues, and people are hoping that the new administration will tackle that. There's also a hope that COVID restrictions and payments to self-employed or middle-sized companies will come into place. People want an end to the COVID-19 pandemic, and so they see the new president, his administration, and the PPP as a symbol of that change, as a move on out of the pandemic. Of course, there are many people in South Korea. They all want different things, but a return to normalcy, some housing prices, and just a bit of change seem to be some of the key issues here, I think.
And well, Professor An, currently the Democratic Party of Korea, which is now the opposition party, it holds a strong majority in parliament, having swept up all the votes in the last local elections. But how can the ruling PPP secure a significant win? I mean, how many seats or which kind of positions would they have to really gain in order to turn the situation around in their favour?
Yes, well, in addition to the local election, right, there are 7 by-election for the National Assembly seat, right, including the former DP president candidate Lee Jae-myung. But however, the local election does not directly affect on the composition of the National Assembly, right? That's local election is local election. We'll have to see the general election, which will take place in 2024. Right. So now it's only 7 seats is in competition, right? 7 out of 300. Well, it's not a significant number, but still, and it have the impact on the big name players. What there's Lee Jae-myung and An Chol-soo, right? The big name players will have some impact on the political climate in Korea in the future, right? And also if the President Yoon's party have the significant victory on the local election, which will have positive impact on the upcoming general election as well. I think that so we'll have to see what happens.
Professor TIZZARD, well, speaking of the by-elections with some big names there like An Chol-soo and also Lee Jae-myung, well, do you think this indicates them running for the by-election seats? Do you think this indicates that they're willing to come out again for the next presidential election?
We've just finished one presidential election and you're asking me about the next one in 5 years.
We want to get ahead.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. Thank you so much. One of the big differences you'll notice between the presidential election and the local elections is that the local elections here, they take place on the street. So for the presidential election, most of it was on television. There were these debates. It was covered in money and glitz and glamour. These local elections generally take place with a lot of campaigning, with a lot of trucks, with a lot of noise. And so from a personal perspective, it's very interesting to see these huge frontrunners, as Professor An mentioned, An Chol-soo, Lee Jae-myung. They've gone from that presidential campaign now to these local elections where it's very much getting on the street, shaking hands with people and making a noise because the budgets are much less. An Chol-soo looks like he's doing rather well in his. Lee Jae-myung is a little bit more debatable. That's a very tight race that he's in. I'm sure both men will be looking forward to the next 5 years, but I think 5 years is a long time. And in South Korea, for the next presidential election, one can only hope that there might be some fresh faces coming forward, some new voices in South Korean politics. Not to say anything against those two respected gentlemen, but change is always a good thing. And so 5 years in the future, who knows what might happen, but good luck to them both in their current campaigns.
Exactly, and while the South Korean public clearly have wanted change for quite some time, and Professor An, now the June 1st races, they're largely expected to reflect public sentiment towards the Yoon administration's first few weeks in office. And well, right now, what's the public sentiment towards him, and in terms of how he's handled the most important state affairs?
Yeah, actually, well, the public sentiment toward the President Yoon has been gradually improving. Actually, the most recent survey showed that his approval rate exceeds 54%, which is the highest so far. Well, I think that this approval rate increase has been caused by several factors, right, including that bilateral summit meeting with the U.S. President Joe Biden, and also the successful implementation of a supply budget at the National Assembly with a record high amount of 62 trillion won. So basically, money talks, right? So I think that's a good sign for the President Moon and his political party. We'll call like convention effect as well, right?
And your thoughts on this, Professor TIZZARD? What do you think is the public sentiment towards the Yoon administration right now? I mean, do you think it's currently working in his favour?
I think a lot of political analysts will point to this local election as being evidence of support or rejection of President Yoon Suk-yeol's first few weeks in office. I respectfully disagree with that, I think, because I think people will be voting. They haven't really changed their mind in the last few weeks. Whether they like President Yoon or supported him a few weeks ago, they're likely to still hold that position. And if they don't, I don't believe their minds will have changed too much in the last few weeks. Of course, some people are going to say that the meeting with US President Biden, that the North Korean provocations, that some ruptures in the Democratic Party are all playing into this, and we have to account for some of that. I do agree. Yet more broadly, I don't really believe that public sentiment will have shifted to a great degree since the very recent presidential election. President Yoon will still have his supporters, and they will be supporting him and his party and the various candidates in these local elections. There might be some change, and as Professor An said, there is some growing support. President Yoon seems to be growing into his role and winning some people over with his positions, but I think we're more likely to see a continuation of the recent two, the mayoral election and the presidential election, and I think those views will still hold.
Professor An, now early voting took place over the weekend and it came to 20.6% in turnout, and that's higher than the last two local elections. What do you think this really indicates, and do you think we're going to see just as a high turnout tomorrow?
Well, I mean, as you said, like considering like record high voting rate of 60.6, 20.6%, right? Well, we have a higher expectation. But however, if you compare with the last election was 20.1%, so it's only 0.5% actually the difference. But still is the highest for last for several elections, right? So I guess I'm expecting that based on the higher, I mean record high the early voting rate, I guess the was, our final figure will be exceed previous one, which was about 60%. But I don't think it's going to be over 65% because this local election is not, really popular. It's not as much as popular like with the, presidential elections. So about somewhere 60 to 65%. But anyway, I think that the record high early voting rate, might be the sign. I say might be the sign of a stronger public support for the President Yoon and his political party. Well, but however, we have to wait and see what really happen, tomorrow.
And Professor TIZZARD, now foreigners can vote in local elections, foreign residents, of course, and despite the growing proportion of those who are eligible to vote, turnout has been on the decline. Now, why do you think this is?
It's a very good question. Let me try to deconstruct it for you, for those of you that know my work elsewhere. I am eligible to vote, and I'll be voting tomorrow. There's about 120,000 people eligible to vote, citizens that are not Korean, foreign residents, permanent residents. And in 2005, South Korea became the first Asian country to allow non-citizens to vote. This is a beautiful thing. It's a great sign of South Korea's forward thinking. The narrative at the moment is turnout amongst foreign residents is decreasing. If I can just give you an example of this, however, to see it a different way. In 2010, 4,000 non-citizens voted. In 2014, 8,000 non-citizens voted. In 2018, that number jumped to 14,000. So the number of non-citizens voting in this is growing all the time. It's doubling, more than doubling. And so we have this narrative that the non-citizens aren't, and there's this. But that's one way of looking at it. The other way to look at it is this number is increasing every time, and I would expect it will also increase this time. So then we're left with this question of who are these non-citizens? South Korea has a way of demarcating everybody is Korean and then everybody else is other. But those others, they're so diverse in terms of their occupation, in terms of their nationality, in terms of their socioeconomic status. So I think it would be more appropriate to unpack who those people are and why some of those people aren't voting and why the people are voting are doing that. That to me is the important question going on there.
I think we're about to zoom out of that meeting with you on the screen there, but do excuse our technical glitches there. But yes, and finally, Professor An, now it looks like the Democratic Party of Korea are experiencing some internal there's some internal strife going on within the party as well, and with them falling behind the PPP in most polls. What do you think this election really means for them? Do you think they're going to have some soul searching to do?
Well, we see that what happening right now to DP is very similar to happen to PPP for the last presidential election, right? Some disagreement among the leader group, and then some lot of issues about policy issues, right? So I guess it's like a more like time because that now is power shifting from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party, right? Things changing. So I guess it's kind of a changing process, right? So still, and then as the loser of the last presidential candidate, I mean the election, DP have to do better than what they're doing right now, because they have to persuade the public that they deserve better than what they are doing right now. So.
Well, as Professor TIZZARD said as well, hopefully we'll see some fresh new faces in the next elections to come. And well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview, but that was AN Jun-seong, visiting professor of Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies, and David TIZZARD, professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.